my goal for today is really to give you some context and terms and resources so that you can go dig in further to this topic, because product ownership is a really, really big topic, and there's a lot of things that go into it. So today we'll talk about kind of what is product and why are we talking about this so much all of a sudden. Also, what is product ownership? I would be remiss if we didn't talk about that a whole lot today. And then finally, some techniques that will sound familiar to you from your business analysis perspective and things that will help you along this product ownership journey. Okay, so let's dive in. On the next slide, let's talk about like, why are we focusing on products? And the truth is really things are changing, and all of you know this just as well as I do, that people, process, technology, competitors, markets, and consumer expectations are changing and evolving all the time. So we need to be able to keep up with those changes. So that feeds into why we need agility with our work. So a couple things feed into being agile and product centric. And one of those is an acronym that I'm starting to hear a lot more lately. So people will say, we live in a VUCA world. So VUCA, that's an acronym for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So I'm guessing you can all relate to that too. So things are changing a lot and they're ambiguous. We're not sure where they're going to go. They're uncertain. So that means that as we're building things, we're not always sure what the right answer is going to be. We're not sure what our customers will respond to. And so that means we want to release small changes so that we can experiment and say, how did they respond? What are people thinking about with this? So another factor in our agile and product centricity is just that there are so many advances because of companies like, here's another acronym, like FAANG. So F-A-A-N-G. That's Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google. So you may also hear of them as the digital natives. So they are raising the bar for all of us. So the amazing products and services that they provide, probably everyone on this call is a customer of one of those companies to some degree. And even though they may not be your competitor, your users also interface with these companies. So they have come to expect the quality that the digital natives provide. So if we combine these things, so the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, plus just the raising of the bar on what people and customers expect, that means, we need to be agile and we need to be product centric. It means companies can't afford in time or in money to work on a project that takes 10 months to get out to your users. Companies can't afford to shift members of their workforce from working on this project over here to another one over there where they need to learn an entire new product or customer base. So we need to be both agile and product centric. So on the next slide, we'll think a little bit of product lifecycle, because if we're shifting from a project mindset to a product one, that means we're probably sticking around with the product longer than we used to. So with a product, there's always some kind of incubation and build period before it gets launched. And most of us are probably very familiar with at least the growth and maturity stages. And different things are needed in all of these stages here. And good news, both business analysis and product ownership skills and techniques are useful at every stage here. But then the key is that in order to really get to know your customer and your product, you as a business analysis professional will probably see even more of the product life cycle. All right, so as we do this, we also really need to learn our product. We really need to learn our customers. So let's talk about what product ownership is. So in order to do that, we've got to take a little step back and talk about Scrum. So on the next slide, we see Scrum team accountabilities. So what is Scrum? Scrum is a framework that helps teams generate value. So Scrum is the most common framework for delivering software in an agile way. And the Scrum Guide, it's actually been around since the early 90s. I know that was surprising to me when I first learned it. So it's been around for quite a while. And as you would expect from a bunch of Agile people, it gets updated a lot. Like when the authors, the trainers, or the community see like, hey, we need to make an update to this. We've got to straighten some things out or help people understand something better. So there was a big update at the end of 2020, and it's here on the screen here. So normally, I'm still having trouble with this. Normally you would say, these are the roles on a Scrum team. But in this big update in 2020, they called it accountabilities. So that's really just to highlight that everyone on a Scrum team is accountable for delivering some kind of value. Okay, so if we move forward one, we can see what the responsibilities of a product owner are. So this is right from the Scrum Guide. The product owner is accountable for maximizing the value of the product, resulting from the work of the Scrum team. So this is the kicker here, and this is why we're talking today. How this is done may vary widely across organizations, teams, and individuals. So, so something kind of tough here is like there's not a prescription. And that's a great thing, and it's a really tough thing. So when you're first starting out, it can be really helpful to have more guardrails so that you know what to expect. What is this job? What's it all about? But you really kind of have to experiment and see what works for the team, for the people on it, the skills they have, for the product you have. So that makes it kind of tough. Another thing that's tough, I know a good number of you are already product owners or proxy product owners. Yeah, it's a huge job. Product ownership is enormous. So if you're not the named product owner, you're a developer on the Scrum team. So someone who is a business analyst, a proxy PO, an agile analyst, you will be considered a developer who is skilled in business analysis. And yeah, another thing about developer, that can be really confusing to the uninitiated. It might look like, oh, it's only, you know, developers, these software engineers who type this. This is how software engineers work. Sorry, trying not to talk with my hands. I can't help it sometimes. Okay, so a developer on a Scrum team, though, in reality, people with business analysis skills, people with quality assurance skills, it's not just people developing the software. So you may be a developer on a Scrum team, it's just the way that they describe it in the Scrum Guide. So we do still need people with business analysis skills in Scrum. All right, so let's see. Now the headline to this slide is really like the answer to who does what, yeah, is it depends. So another thing, so here's probably the biggest piece of advice from Emily here today is don't worry about the job titles right now, especially if you're really just getting started with Agile or with Scrum. It can be really distracting to be like, oh, well, my job title is business analyst, but my role is proxy product owner, and what does all of this stuff mean? Don't worry about it right now. So just like we see a ton of changes where we are in our industry, HR departments are also seeing a lot of change too, and this is a lot for them to keep up with. So especially at the larger companies, sometimes they want to see, well, okay, how is this going to pan out before they go about updating job titles, job families, that sort of thing. So what we do want to do is rather than, you know, starting out and saying like, hey, I'm a business analysis professional, this is my story card, I'm going to write the user story, I'm going to write the acceptance criteria, y'all can read it, but you're not going to update it. Let's not do that. We don't need to build walls. What we need to do in this VUCA world is have all the brain power that we can get. So working together with your team, reducing silos, we want to promote the teamwork and the collaboration. So what we can do is think about this stuff in terms of roles. So we want to think about business analysis, people with business analysis skills, people who support product ownership. There are lots of people on a Scrum team who fit that role. Okay, so that was some of the what. Let's move into a little bit more of like, how is this going to look? So on the next slide, here are some BA and business analysis and product ownership focus areas. So getting oriented here, people who do business analysis, so actually most of you on the call identify as business analysts, you're probably more on the left side where you're your focus is thinking about really the internals of the company. You have a lot of awareness of what goes on internally there, the inner workings of the organization, the systems, the processes. So your focus is probably inward, like toward the Scrum team, the people that you will be working with day in and day out. You're thinking about how can we deliver value incrementally, and how do we provide solutions that meet the customer needs, and what are the requirements that we need in order to make that happen. So you can do all of that because you're closely working with the other development team members or the other people with the developer accountability on the Scrum team, and thinking about the systems and the changes that need to be made to those. So what someone with business analysis skills will do, will really talk about the why and translate that into the how. We're thinking requirements and solutions. So if we shift all the way over to the left, to the product ownership side of things, we still have a lot of those foundational BA skills, but we're a little more, or a lot more, maybe outward facing. So you're thinking about the product vision and the roadmap. So for this entire product we have, where do we want to take it? What are the capabilities that we want to build in over the next few years? And then you're also dealing with customers and paying very close attention to what's important to them, what their pain points are, and also you're working with other internal stakeholders. So these might be people also within your company, maybe not on the Scrum team, but people who have a huge interest in this stuff. So could be legal, could be data analysts. Hopefully you would be working a lot with data type people there. So we've got a lot of the same foundational skills that go with these. So if we look in the middle now to where, you know, we're talking about both, this is product ownership analysis here. So we're thinking about stakeholder engagement, processes, collecting and responding to feedback. So someone wearing a more business analysis kind of hat, I suppose, is thinking about feedback from the Scrum team, whereas someone who's working more with product ownership, you're thinking about what the customers are saying and doing, what the internal stakeholders really want to have. So it's just kind of where are we shifting our focus and using these skills. So both areas you want to foster shared understanding. It just depends on with whom and over which kind of topics. Attention to the problem space. I want to hit on this a little bit. So yeah, everyone here has some business analysis skills. Probably everyone can relate to, hey, we have this project, we have this need, we may need to make this change, and then the person hands you a solution. And as business analysts, as we would all do, we would say, well, why? Why is this important? And what difference does this make? What metrics are we trying to move? So, so the good news is lots of people out there in the industry are really recognizing this now, and they're using the terms, we want to stay in these problem space. So the problem space is like, hey, a customer has a problem, they have an unmet need. And there might be a whole lot of ways, a whole lot of solutions to resolve that problem, but we want to really be more familiar with the problem because the solution, like we said earlier, the solution we implement may not be the best thing. We may have to go back and try something else, but we don't know unless we experiment. So solution space is just a little way to turn your head a little bit sideways and think about things a little bit differently. All right, so that's some of the what. Let's go to the next slide where we'll move into some of the how. So here's some more business analysis and product ownership. So to get oriented to this slide, we'll think about, let's go on the right side. I'm still learning my left and right. Getting better every day, I swear though. Okay, so we're providing value to the customer. The product ownership type people are really, hopefully everyone, but they're very, very focused on providing value to the customer. They're a little closer to that stakeholder usually. So you want to align to the product vision and discover those needs. Remember, we're staying in the solution space as the problem space, staying in the problem space as much as we can, because we can't be sure that every solution is going to solve our problem. All right, so our product owner is really focused on that high level stuff. in both areas, it's really important to make decisions. So you're providing and managing feedback, you might be answering questions. It just depends on which kind of stakeholder set you're talking to. And then if we move over to the right, when things move to the Scrum team, your person skilled in business analysis is going to do things like slice the work into small batches so that we can provide that incremental value. They'll also prioritize and then kind of elaborate. Okay, so we've chosen this solution to our problem, and now let's elaborate on what the systems and the processes and the data need to do in order to support that. So yeah, also I'm kind of separating these things out, but really, so say you have both a named product owner and someone skilled in business analysis to support them, they're also going to be working really closely together. So it's not that only the business analysis professional will be thinking about what the Scrum team does. You'll be working pretty darn closely with the product owner, but sometimes going your separate ways to get a little bit more info and then coming back again together to collaborate and making sure that you're resolving those customer needs. Okay, so then if we go back into the bottom right corner, let's say we've implemented this solution, we need to evaluate that solution. So BAs, you will remember this very well from studying the BABOK. Evaluating the solution is very, very important. It's, did this change make the difference that we hoped it would? So this is how we kind of stay in the problem space and say, did the need that we discovered above, did it get met by the solution that we implemented? Because if it didn't, maybe we need to try a different approach. Maybe we need to try a different solution. So all of these kind of go together, they flow together. You'll work pretty closely both with the Scrum team and the other person who supports product ownership and business analysis there. All right, so this is kind of big picture, what happens with this stuff. Let's see, yeah, let's head on to the next slide. And here are some of, we're gonna move into techniques now. Here are some of my favorite techniques. Yeah, just as someone who's been doing business analysis stuff for a while and working with product owners for quite a long time. So, so we've got our same orientation here. Let's maybe start on the right again, where for product ownership, you're going to be thinking more about strategy. What's the visioning that we're doing? Let's make that product roadmap. And then impact mapping is also a really great technique where you stay in the problem space. You have, and here's another acronym, you have an OMTM, one metric that matters. You put that in the center of things and you think about all the different solutions or changes could impact that one metric that matters, and you just kind of try them. You try to implement them as solutions, and then you watch what happens to the OMTM afterward. Another note here, so the items that are in bold and have a star there, these techniques appear in both the Agile extension to the BABOK and in the Guide to Product Ownership Analysis. So that's how I know they work pretty darn well for an Agile space, and also I just like to use these techniques a lot. All right, so we talked a little strategy, story slicing and splitting. This is tough. It's really hard to do. You need the entire team there to talk through it and also to kind of get some buy-in for things. So user story mapping is a great way to slice and split stories. It's also very helpful for prioritization, also for release planning and sprint planning. Story decomposition, that's another way of saying, okay, we're going to break the work down. And then minimum viable product. A very useful technique, but an often misunderstood technique. So what to watch out for there with minimum viable product is you're not putting junk out there in front of the customer. It's got to be something that is minimally viable to put out with your users. So you don't want something that's half-baked, something that doesn't work well with user experience. It's just the smallest acceptable thing or acceptable change that you are willing to put in front of users to try to get some feedback. That's the other important part about an MVP. You need to get feedback from it. So we're kind of back to that solution evaluation. Okay, and then some techniques for backlog refinement. Behavior-driven development is thinking about, okay, what what behaviors do the customers have? How do the systems behave in response to that? So you're really trying to have a user-centric view of the world there. User stories, that is the epitome of having user-centric story cards. And then job stories. Job stories are super interesting too. I encourage you guys to take a look at these. So again, they're in both the Agile extension and the Guide to Product Ownership Analysis. They assume that someone is using their product because they need to accomplish some job. They have a job that needs to be done. And so the job stories really help you think about that. Like, what is this person trying to accomplish? So it gets a little bit more detailed than a user story, and it also speaks a little more to their motivation. So I like the job stories because it lets you really think more about why and really start to cultivate even more of that customer intimacy. All right. So let's see. Oh yeah, so I should say too, backlog refinement. Let's think about the Scrum Guide again. So I think a few slides up, we read from the Scrum Guide and it said that oh, maybe not in this slide. Trust me, the Scrum Guide says the product owner is accountable for the maintenance of the backlog and also delivering maximum value from the product backlog. So, but here we see backlog refinement. Actually, a whole lot of this stuff across the whole slide, much of this is backlog refinement. So that just means we're updating, we're prioritizing, estimating, slicing the elements of the product backlog. You might call them epics or features or user stories or story cards or product backlog items. So that's the accountability for that lies with the product owner, but very often it's delegated to someone else who is responsible for it. So that can be your proxy product owner, your agile analyst, your person skilled in business analysis. So that's why backlog refinement, in my view of the world, hits a little bit harder in the business analysis space, but it really is a product owner accountability. Let's see. All right, so let's go to the next slide. So here we're back to, we saw those 3 columns a couple slides ago, and here we go. We're gonna have even more techniques. So let's move forward 1. And here are lots more techniques. And these ones, interestingly, everything here, there they go. So trying to align them to the different elements of the business analysis and product ownership focus areas. Everything here appears in either the BABOK business analysis body of knowledge or the Agile extension to the BABOK or the Guide to Product Ownership Analysis. And spoiler, there are so many more techniques out there as well. So there are lots and lots of ways that you as a business analysis professional can accomplish these things that are part of product ownership. So what's here, this isn't even everything. We saw my favorites on the previous slide. There's even more here. And there are even some, general elicitation. So there are lots of elicitation techniques. You've got focus groups, interviewing, observation, so many ways to elicit requirements, elicit business needs from people. And also there are a whole lot of collaboration techniques out there. So this is just kind of to show you that there are a lot of ways to get this stuff done. And we tend to, like you saw from me above, we tend to go with our favorite technique or use the one that we're most comfortable with, which is totally fine. But sometimes it can help to kind of to branch out and try something a little bit new. So I would encourage everyone to check out collaborative games. There are lots of great things there. I bet everybody's got Zoom fatigue. Is maybe kind of tired of doing all this work online all the time, because I'm guessing lots of people are at home, or if you are at work, you're probably not getting into small enclosed spaces with other people. So collaborative games might be kind of cool to do. You might have to be a little more creative because you'll have to use web conferencing technology to make this stuff happen. Okay, let's see. Yeah. So that's maybe some coverage of techniques. Let's move on to the next slide and we'll start talking tips and resources. So here I was trying to think of like, oh, wow, we could give a whole bunch of tips here, but then as I was looking through the guide to product ownership analysis, they had this lovely picture. So thank you, IIBA. The 7 principles of agile analysis, these actually appear in the agile extension to the BABOK. And then this picture I just really liked because I was looking at it the other day. So these are 7 things that you want to keep in mind as much as possible. So remember, we want to be agile because we want to be able to sense and respond to change. We want to be able to make small changes so that we can see what our customers and our users really respond to, because in our VUCA world where there is lots of uncertainty, we can't be sure that a single solution will work. So here we are thinking about Agile. And there are 7 things here, just a few I really want to highlight. And let's see, there are, yeah, let's start with think as a customer. Hopefully that's coming through loud and clear today. BAs are usually very focused. So remember a few slides ago, we can be very focused internally. And this is kind of how the BABOK is structured too. You're thinking about an organization and the changes and the stakeholders and how you're going to make those changes in the ecosystem that exists there. So yes, there are other stakeholders who may be external. You may have government agencies and all kinds of other things to comply with, but lots of the business analysis stuff can be really deep and detailed, and you're looking at the systems, the processes, the internal people. So if you are in that world, see if you can kind of shift your focus again a little bit more to externally, to be thinking about the customers. So yeah, product ownership is all about the customer and the user. And thinking about user stories from a couple slides ago, that's one reason user stories are so powerful, because for every story card, for every change that the team makes, a lot of agile teams will write a user story so that they can keep the user in mind. All right, so we'll talk about see the whole. So seeing the whole, yes, let's ask about what's most important to the customer and still keep that in mind as you're delivering value. Sometimes the further you get from the customer, the easier it is to say, hey, this change is easier for our department, but it might ultimately make things harder for the users. So an example can be, well, we want to ultimately automate this business process that's happening, but that's a whole lot of work for this department to do. So right now we'll have to have another department make it happen manually, or facilitate the process manually, or even have the customers facilitate it manually. So, and that's probably a trade-off that gets made all the time, but just kind of a relatable example as to how seeing the whole can be really important. So think about your entire value stream and how you go from beginning to end delivering that value, and make sure everything that you're doing, would the customer pay for this? Would the customer care if I did this or if I didn't? Okay, let's also talk about analyze to determine what is valuable. So we talked about this a little bit toward the beginning too. So remember the impact mapping technique and also solution evaluation. So when you put a change in front of customers, you're not done. I know we like to think that we're done, but we're not done yet. We still need to analyze to see if this change actually mattered, if it made a difference, if people are responding to it. So if you deliver a change on time and under budget, but the customers hate it or they don't understand it, not a successful change. It's successful if you realize that the customers hate it or they don't understand it and you do something about it. But yes, we've got to start changing the way we think of success. So analyzing to determine what is valuable is a big part of that. So success doesn't mean done. Success means valuable. All right, and then some other things here on this slide that I won't get into a whole lot. We can get real using examples. That ties in with behavior-driven development from a couple slides ago. You want to understand what is doable. That's an important part of sprint planning. How much incremental value do we actually have the capacity to provide in this sprint? Stimulate collaboration and continuous improvement. Those collaborative games can help with that. And avoid waste. That one kind of speaks for itself. All right, now let's go into our final slide where we show, this is the product ownership analysis framework. So the IIBA just recently released the guide to product ownership analysis, and hopefully that's why you're all here today to hear a little bit about that. The product ownership analysis guide is organized mainly around these 7 ideas. It's pretty cool, like probably at least 100 of the pages talk about each one of these concepts and then a whole lot of things that are related to it. So it's really interesting to see the way that this stuff is laid out. So a couple things to highlight here. So obsess about value, that should be obvious by now that at least I obsess about value. And now hopefully you will too. We don't want to release junk that nobody wants. We need to just relentlessly pursue what is valuable and also not assume that we know exactly what that is. All right, apply foundational concepts. Hopefully that's coming through loud and clear. You want to set up both your team and your organization for success. We want to look both within the team, within our organization and the systems and the processes, and then also point our gaze to, looking externally, looking at people outside of the team, other stakeholders and other customers. So a lot of these foundational concepts and techniques and tools that you use as a BA, a lot of those things are useful for product ownership analysis as well. And that section in the POA guide where it really talks about these 7 items, it shows a lot of the BABOK techniques that go along with these too. So take a look at that. Okay, then cultivating customer intimacy, same as before, probably can't say it enough, but building empathy for the customer so that the team can really collaborate on, how do we apply what we've learned? How do we address these customer problems? Engaging the team is also about like sharing goals with the team and empowering them to let them also help come up with solutions. So, so earlier when I talked about how sometimes you're just handed a solution to implement, and then you have to go up back and say, well, why does this matter? Why is it valuable? What metric does it serve? That, other members of the team want to hear those reasons as well. It can be so motivating to know what those things are. Let's see, so make an impact. This is, we want to think, I guess, both internally and externally again, just making our customers happy as always, but also remember the product vision and the roadmap that the product ownership person is thinking about. That making these changes is also all about advancing the strategy of your company, not just advancing the strategy for your product. So there's a lot of opportunity to really make an impact in your team, your company, your space in the marketplace too. All right, deliver often. This hopefully is a really clear one now. We want to be able to pivot. We want to learn from what our customers are telling us. We want to be able to be agile with things. So another piece of delivering often is, seeing, did this work? And just doing those small changes so that they're not so shocking to your customers. So, okay, so the other day, maybe you guys get it too, with Netflix. So I turned on my TV and going to watch something on Netflix, and I noticed like, oh, there's a Netflix update. But the cool thing is I didn't have to get out the Netflix user manual. I don't think there is such a thing. I knew what to do. I could still find my show. I could still get it started. I knew exactly what happened. I noticed something was a little bit different because maybe the tiles are in a different place or the autoplay for the trailers started sooner or later. But the great thing about that is there are updates coming all the time, but they're so small and so frequent that even when we do notice them, it's a total non-event. So that's also another example of like, now I am trained to, by Netflix, to not need a user manual, to not have to go out and see like, oh, what was this change? And yeah, I want to download it. And what does it mean? I need to read the release notes and understand it. Nobody needs that anymore. So, and again, Netflix and the other digital natives have really raised the bar on what people expect out of their digital products. All right, finally here, we want to learn fast. So we're back to measuring what matters and then also assessing what's delivered. So we're going to learn from our customers through interviews, through observation, through all of those things, but also through looking at the metrics and the information that they provide us after these changes have taken place. So we want to learn fast and incorporate those learnings as quickly as we can. All right, so kind of to summarize everything, the product ownership analysis guide and the agile extension to the BABOK, they both have lots and lots of techniques that can really help you get started on your journey to product ownership or product ownership analysis. And what's great about the POA guide is that it's all about, how do we take these system specific or organization specific skills or skills to analyze these things? How do we take these skills that we've learned as VAs and also kind of move our focus outward toward our product vision and roadmap and to focus those skills on the customers? So all of this is to help us be more successful in an agile environment where we also have a focus on product. Okay, all right, and with that, let's move into some questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Emily, for such an informative overview of product ownership. We'll take a moment now to open up the floor for a Q&A to answer some questions from the audience. I welcome our attendees to send their questions using the questions tab in your control panel. And the good thing is the question box is hot. So we have tons of questions already. So I will kick off with some of the questions that I've seen flow in earlier throughout the session and continue as time permits. So the first question I'll ask just real quick because it came in from more than one individual. Could you please repeat that acronym VUCA from earlier in the session?
Yes, VUCA. Yeah, when I hear it, I think of Veruca Salt, and then I'm like back to the 90s or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, whichever preference you have. So VUCA, VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So yeah, so things are volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That's a good
Sure.
one. And there were a few other good acronyms that you that you shared that I jotted down myself. So thank you for that.
Cool.
Um, so I've got a question from Tom, who's asking, what's the difference between the product owner and the product manager? What are your thoughts on
Ah,
that?
okay, so that's a good one. So that I know there's a spot. So in the guide to product ownership analysis, there's definitely a good description of it in there. In my view of the world, and thank you, Tom, for asking that because I didn't even talk about product manager in here. So a product manager, you can think of that person as being responsible for everything about the product, or maybe accountable is the right word. So also think about the financials. So the profit and loss that happens with the product. So like the really big picture type things. So yeah, the product manager is probably more high level, and especially in a lot of big companies, than the product owner. So the product manager has those higher level responsibilities. The product owner is often more closely related to the team that's making the changes to the product. So another resource that could be very interesting is a book called Escaping the Build Trap, and that's by Melissa Perry, Perri. Business analysts, if you read that, you will be like nodding and saying, yes, I have lived this before. But yes, her book is called Escaping the Build Trap, and a big chunk of it talks about the product owner and product manager and like chief product owner type job progression. So the terms might not always be the same, but it's a really great overview of what it means to be a product focused organization and what it means to be a product manager.
Thank you. And thank you for mentioning two really great resources that can kind of dig deeper into that question and even more, I'm sure. I have another question from Kushal. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And it is also about roles. So his question or her question is, what does the Scrum Master do?
Oh, the Scrum Master. So that that is also like the question of the day where I've been lately. So the Scrum Master, think of them as being like the coach to everyone on the team. So off the top of my head, I can't rattle off the accountabilities now of the Scrum Master, especially since the guide shrank a little this year. But the Scrum Master needs, there it is. The Scrum Master is accountable for making sure the team is using the Scrum framework appropriately. So you'll hear the term servant leader. And interestingly, in the 2020 version of the Scrum Guide, they took the word servant out of there. So the Scrum Master is a leader. The Scrum Master makes sure that both the Scrum team, so that's the developers and the product owner, understand and use the Scrum framework, but also that people external to the Scrum team understand what Scrum is all about. Because those of us who maybe have been on Scrum teams, the Scrum Guide itself is, the focus of it is really just this Scrum team. But in real life, all of us probably work in organizations where there are a whole lot of people outside of that Scrum team. So you still have legal departments, you still have managers and HR departments and all kinds of other stakeholders that don't live just on that Scrum team that you all have to interface with. So this the Scrum team, so I just remembered there's a YouTube video and I don't remember who made it, but it features a rugby player, and if you're a rugby fan, you would probably know who this guy who is pretending to be the Scrum Master of this team, and he's basically just tackling people who try to approach the developers on the Scrum team because, like, hey, they've got a sprint goal, we cannot sacrifice the sprint goal. So that's kind of a silly way,
Mhm.
but of showing that the responsibility of the Scrum Master is to kind of protect the Scrum team so that they can get the work done that they need to do to maximize the value of the product backlog. So there's a lot more that goes into that, but hopefully that's a good start for you.
Fantastic. Keeping on that similar line of questioning, George asks, how can I work with the Scrum Master to keep deadlines with the team?
Oh, okay. That's a whole other almost day-long conversation. Okay. So maybe So yes, I love that you're asking how can I work with them, because that's the name of the game with all of this agile stuff, right? You've got a whole team. Let's use all of that brain power that we possibly can. So we don't need to say, well, the product owner is the one who's responsible for release planning. It's like, okay, well, they may be, but if your Scrum Master has the skills to really help with that, fantastic, work with them. Okay, so let's see. So working with your Scrum Master, so remember they are responsible for helping everyone use and understand the Scrum framework. Um, hmm. Something else that the Scrum Guide, so remember the Scrum Guide is pretty limited to the view of the Scrum team, and the implications in the Scrum Guide are like, well, we don't have to plan. That is a myth. Lots of planning. You still need planning in Scrum. The difference is you're planning continuously. So so let's mentally rewind a few slides and think about user story mapping. And now that I think about it in the IIBA's materials, they call it story mapping. So if you're going to Google that, either one works, but IIBA stuff is just called story mapping. So story mapping, this is all about, let's think about our user, what they need, what are the tasks that they need to be able to complete, and how can our product help them complete it. So also when you're story mapping, you think about, okay, what do we need to do as a Scrum team in order to meet those goals that we have for the user? So, so Jeff Patton wrote the book on story mapping, and he's amazing because anybody can go read this stuff, but he's also just kind of given the community rights to replicate what's in the book user story mapping because so many people were using it and he happened to be the guy that wrote the book. So the good news is a lot of the information that you Google is going to be very consistent. So one of, I want to say steps 4 and 5 of story mapping or user story mapping is creating a release plan. So you think about things in an MVP kind of way. what's the smallest thing that we can do here to still provide value to our customers? And you can slide different amounts of work into different releases, and then that also helps you prioritize. So a Scrum Master can also help you facilitate that. It can be really challenging though. So one of the keys also is to think about breaking down your backlog decomposition, story decomposition, and doing your decomposition in vertical slices. So that's another good term to be able to Google. So that means that whatever layers of the system need to be changed in order to make this happen, they all get changed together so that you can release something valuable. So just updating the database, not necessarily helpful to a user if the database isn't talking to a UI through the API. So, so I'm giving you a lot of terms here. Let me sum it up here. Yes, work with your Scrum Master. Your Scrum Master can help run interference. User story mapping is a great technique to use there. It takes some practice to really get it going well, but you've got Jeff Patton's name to go look for his information. And maybe one last plug here. So for anyone, when you're first getting going with Agile, like it seems kind of simple, like, oh, this Scrum guide, I can print this out and read it in 20 minutes. So the great thing about the Scrum guide is Scrum is a framework. It's not a methodology. You know, the framework has a handful of roles, a handful of artifacts, and a handful of events. So the good news is it's super flexible, but the bad news is when you get started, it can be really tough because you may not know what to do. So having a coach or someone who has done this before to facilitate that user story mapping session can also be super helpful. Okay, I'll stop there.
Thank you. And you know what? Now I understand why you said that could almost be a topic on its own, because you know, you can really dig into some of these questions. So thank you for that answer, and thank you, George, for submitting that question. We're running a little short on time, but I will squeeze in two more questions. I've got one question from David that says, Emily, can you define product? I hope it's just not software.
Good call, David. It is not just software. So a product is it can be a thing, it can be an app, it can be a service. Products can be nested within products. So if I've got my phone here, I've got a ton of apps on here, which are also products. So let's think of some examples of products. Okay, so a product is also something that provides some value to like a market. So if I'm providing requirements to a developer, that's not really a product because yeah, that developer finds it useful, but not a whole lot of people beyond that. So some people will say like, oh yeah, this API, this UI, this database, these are products. Nope, all of them put together that provide value to some kind of person are products. So for an insurance company, your product could be car insurance, could be health insurance, could be small business insurance. For an airline, a product could be being able to get your luggage, or like luggage handling is a product there. And I have a slide that I don't have in front of me that has some other good examples. But yeah, it can be a thing, it can be software, it can be a service. The ability to have your taxes handled, and that's a product that a CPA would handle. I guess that's probably an answer specific to the US, but hopefully that helps. Oh,
Awesome.
and Mike Cohn. So Mike Cohn literally wrote the book on user stories, C-O-H-N. So he's just good at stuff in general. He has a blog post or a blog entry that's called "What is a Product?" Check that out. He has a good answer in there. That's where I usually send people. So Mike Cohn, C-O-H-N. Okay. Sorry, Tiffany. Go
No,
ahead.
no, no, no apologies. Thank you. I love
I can
that
go all
all of
day.
your answers, that you have great additional resources for our audience to kind of dig in deeper. So that's awesome. The last question we have time for is more of a, I think it's a question and a comment. So it says, so is product ownership analysis a new discipline stemming from product ownership? Yes, no. What's your opinion on that? I know what mine is, but
Yeah. So, yeah, that's an interesting question because product ownership is just something that was kind of invented by like the Scrum Guide. So, I would say yes, product ownership analysis is a new discipline, and thank you IIBA for laying out so much of this. So, yeah, reading the guide to product ownership analysis is really interesting because yeah, it's kind of a blend of business analysis type things, but specific to like, how do I make it actually work in an agile world? And kind of like I said before, yeah, product ownership is enormous. So I've worked with agile teams for at least a decade and worked pretty closely with product owners for much of that. I have only seen once where one person can handle all of the things that are needed to be that singular product owner that the Scrum Guide describes. So in real life, that product owner needs a ton of help. So the guide to product ownership analysis is really kind of a good way to see like how does this work in real life. One of my favorite things, yeah, about the product, now I'm debating what's my favorite thing about the guide to product ownership analysis is that there are a few different personas that go through at least the beginning part of it, where
that's right. Yeah.
here's a product owner and this is what she does and what she cares about and the challenges that she has. Okay, and then same deal for someone who's an agile analyst. And then, okay, the same stuff for someone who is a proxy product owner. So this is a whole lot of stuff. And especially if you're new to an agile world, this guide can be really helpful because the case studies are actually, things that I have seen and things that I have lived through too. So yeah, product ownership analysis could be a new discipline. It's going to take the rest of the world and perhaps HR departments some time to catch up with it.
And yeah, and I echo that. Yeah, definitely. It is a new discipline that really looks at integrating product ownership and business analysis. And I should mention that the guide is available complimentary to IIBA members as part of your membership. And if you're not yet a member, it is available to purchase. So you can learn more, check it out at iiba.org/POA. And with that, I am going to wrap up the end of our Q&A portion of the webinar. And I am going to take a moment to thank Emily for your time and your personal experiences and your tangible insights into product ownership. They were amazing. The additional resources that you provided in the Q&A also invaluable and so, so helpful. So thank you for doing that. Feel free to connect with Emily or the Cleveland chapter of IIBA online or through social media. And I'd like to extend a special thank you to our attendees for being here today. We will send a follow-up email to you, so please feel free to respond with any questions or comments that you may have. Once again, I'd like to say thanks again for joining us today, and we will see you next time.